WWE is in complete chaos right now, and the person responsible for the absolute breakdown of order, respect, and professionalism on SmackDown is sitting comfortably in his general manager office acting like he has no idea what's happening, when the truth is that Nick Aldis has lost complete control of his brand, and his refusal to take accountability for the Bloodline's recent rampage of violence and destruction is not just cowardly, it's a dereliction of duty that should cost him his job immediately. And if you think I'm being too harsh, if you believe that Aldis is doing the best he can in a difficult situation, if you're one of those people who defends WWE management no matter what they do or don't do, then you clearly haven't been paying attention to the absolute carnage that Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa, and the rest of the Bloodline have been unleashing week after week, with zero consequences, zero accountability, and zero interference from the one person who's supposed to be maintaining order on Friday nights. Nick Aldis has been blamed by wrestlers in the locker room, by fans on social media, by industry insiders who understand how wrestling companies operate, for the Bloodline's misbehavior recently on WWE, and honestly the evidence is so overwhelming that defending Aldis at this point requires you to ignore reality completely. Before you click away thinking this is just another rant about wrestling politics, I need you to understand that what's happening on SmackDown right now isn't just bad television or poor creative decisions, it's a systematic failure of leadership that's putting wrestlers at risk, that's creating a toxic work environment, and that's exposing WWE to potential legal and financial consequences if someone gets seriously injured because the general manager refused to do his job and establish boundaries that everyone has to respect. Let's start by examining exactly what the Bloodline has been doing recently, because the list of infractions and violations is so long that it's genuinely shocking Aldis hasn't been forced to take action by WWE corporate headquarters. Over the past month alone, the Bloodline has attacked multiple wrestlers without provocation, they've interfered in matches that had nothing to do with them, they've destroyed property including announce tables and barricades and camera equipment, they've assaulted referees and officials who tried to restore order, they've held entire segments hostage by refusing to leave the ring until their demands were met, and they've essentially turned SmackDown into their personal playground where normal rules and consequences don't apply to them, because they know Nick Aldis doesn't have the spine to stand up to Roman Reigns and his family. Last week's show was particularly egregious when the Bloodline brutalized 3 separate wrestlers in 3 separate segments, leaving bodies scattered around the arena, and Nick Aldis didn't emerge from his office once to address the situation, to promise punishment, to even acknowledge that anything wrong had occurred. The most damning incident happened 2 weeks ago when Solo Sikoa and Jimmy Uso attacked a wrestler backstage in what was clearly a premeditated assault, not a spontaneous confrontation, not a heat-of-the-moment situation, but a calculated attack designed to send a message that nobody on the SmackDown roster is safe from the Bloodline's wrath. Security cameras caught the entire assault on video, there were multiple witnesses including other wrestlers and production staff, and the victim of the attack was legitimately injured and missed the following week's show because of the damage Solo and Jimmy inflicted. This should have resulted in immediate suspensions, fines at minimum, possibly even firings depending on WWE's policies about backstage violence. Instead, what did Nick Aldis do? Absolutely nothing. He released a statement through WWE's social media saying he was reviewing the incident and would take appropriate action, and then he never mentioned it again. The Bloodline faced zero consequences, and they continued their reign of terror without missing a beat. Wrestlers in the SmackDown locker room have been increasingly vocal about their frustration with Aldis's inability or unwillingness to control the Bloodline, with several performers going on record in interviews saying they don't feel safe working in an environment where one group can do whatever they want without facing any repercussions. One wrestler, speaking anonymously because they feared retribution from both the Bloodline and WWE management, told a wrestling news site that Aldis is either completely powerless and serving as a figurehead general manager with no actual authority, or he's deliberately allowing the Bloodline to run wild because someone higher up in WWE's corporate structure has ordered him to let it happen for storyline purposes. Either explanation makes Aldis look terrible, either he's admitting he has no control over his own brand, or he's complicit in creating an unsafe work environment by prioritizing storylines over wrestlers' safety and basic professional standards. The comparison between how Nick Aldis handles the Bloodline versus how Adam Pearce handles similar situations on Raw is absolutely stark, and it exposes just how inadequate Aldis has been in his role. When a faction on Raw starts getting out of control, when wrestlers cross lines or violate rules, Pearce immediately addresses it on camera, he threatens consequences, he books matches designed to provide retribution, he suspends people when necessary, he makes it clear that there are boundaries that cannot be crossed no matter how important you are to WWE's plans. Pearce has fined wrestlers, suspended wrestlers, stripped wrestlers of opportunities, all to maintain order and demonstrate that the general manager position actually means something. Meanwhile, Aldis has done virtually nothing to rein in the Bloodline despite them causing exponentially more chaos than any faction on Raw. This discrepancy has not gone unnoticed by fans who constantly point out on social media that SmackDown feels lawless and out of control while Raw maintains at least some semblance of authority and structure. What makes Aldis's failure even more infuriating is that he has the authority to take action, he has the power to book the Bloodline in handicap matches against multiple opponents, to suspend them indefinitely, to ban them from venues, to strip them of any championships they hold, to do any number of things that would demonstrate consequences for their behavior and establish that actions have ramifications in his brand. But he chooses not to use that authority, he chooses to remain passive and reactive instead of proactive, he chooses to let the bloodline dictate the terms of engagement rather than asserting his own control over the show he's supposed to be managing. This isn't a case of Aldis being put in an impossible position by forces beyond his control. This is a case of someone failing to do the job they were hired to do and then acting surprised when people criticize them for that failure. The excuse that some Aldis defenders use is that he's playing the long game, that he's allowing the bloodline to continue their misbehavior because it's building towards some massive payoff where they finally face consequences and justice is served. But that excuse only works if there's actual evidence that a payoff is coming, and right now there's no indication whatsoever that WWE has any plans to seriously punish the bloodline or to position Nick Aldis as the authority figure who finally brings them to heel. Week after week, the bloodline does whatever they want. Week after week Aldis either ignores it or issues empty threats that never materialize into actual consequences, and week after week the pattern continues with no end in sight. At some point, allowing bad behavior to continue indefinitely without consequences stops being strategic storytelling and starts being negligent management. There's also the very real possibility that Nick Aldis is afraid of the bloodline, specifically afraid of Roman Reigns, who is the biggest star in WWE and who has more political power backstage than probably anyone, including Aldis himself. Roman has proven over the years that he can make or break people's careers through his influence with WWE's upper management, and it's entirely plausible that Aldis knows if he takes aggressive action against the bloodline, Roman will go over his head to Triple H or to Vince McMahon's former lieutenants who still have influence in the company, and Aldis will end up being the one who gets punished or replaced. This would explain why Aldis seems so hesitant to actually exercise the authority his position theoretically gives him, why he seems content to be a figurehead who makes announcements but doesn't actually control anything, why he allows the bloodline to undermine him publicly without fighting back. But if that's the case, if Aldis is genuinely too afraid of the bloodline's backstage political power to do his job effectively, then he needs to resign from the general manager position immediately, and WWE needs to replace him with someone who has the courage and the backing to actually maintain order on SmackDown. A general manager who's afraid of the wrestlers he's supposed to be managing is worse than useless. He's actively detrimental to the show because his weakness emboldens bad behavior and creates a culture where the inmates are running the asylum. WWE needs someone in that position who will walk into the bloodline's locker room, look Roman Reigns in the eye, and tell him that his group needs to follow the rules or face serious consequences, and if Nick Aldis can't be that person, then he's in the wrong job. The timing of the bloodline's recent escalation in misbehavior is also significant because it coincides with rumors that WWE is negotiating new television deals and trying to present themselves as a premium product that commands premium advertising rates and premium rights fees. Having one of your flagship shows descend into barely controlled chaos where the general manager appears powerless and wrestlers are getting legitimately injured because of unchecked violence is not the image WWE wants to project to potential business partners. Network executives and advertisers want to see a well-run professional operation, not a promotion that feels dangerous and unpredictable in ways that could generate negative publicity or regulatory scrutiny. Nick Aldis's failure to control the bloodline isn't just bad for SmackDown's creative direction, it's potentially bad for WWE's business interests at a crucial moment in the company's corporate development. Social media has been merciless in mocking Nick Aldis over the past few weeks, with fans creating memes showing him hiding under his desk while the bloodline destroys the arena, or depicting him as a powerless puppet whose strings are being pulled by Roman Reigns. These memes are funny, but they also reflect a genuine loss of credibility for the general manager character that will be very difficult to recover from. Once the audience stops believing that an authority figure has any real power, once they start viewing that person as a joke or as ineffective, it becomes almost impossible to restore the authority necessary to make future storylines work. Aldis has been so thoroughly undermined by his own inaction that even if he does eventually take a strong stand against the bloodline, fans probably won't take it seriously because they've been conditioned to expect him to back down or fail to follow through on his threats. Some of the most scathing criticism of Nick Aldis has come from retired wrestlers and industry veterans who understand what a general manager's role is supposed to be and who can see clearly that Aldis is failing to fulfill that role. These veterans have pointed out in podcasts and interviews that in any other era of wrestling, a general manager who allowed a faction to run roughshod over their brand the way Aldis has allowed the bloodline to do would have been written off television and replaced within a month. They've noted that authority figures like Stone Cold Steve Austin as the Raw GM, or Eric Bischoff in his various management roles, or even fictional characters like William Regal or Mick Foley as commissioners, all understood that the authority figure needs to be perceived as powerful and willing to use that power, otherwise the entire structure of the show breaks down because there's no check on wrestlers' behavior. The argument that this is all part of WWE's planned storyline and that we should just wait to see how it plays out falls apart when you consider how long this has been going on without any indication that resolution is coming. The bloodline has been dominating SmackDown and facing minimal consequences for their actions for over a year now, and during that entire time Nick Aldis has been general manager doing absolutely nothing to curtail their excesses. If this were truly a storyline building toward Aldis finally asserting authority and delivering justice, we would have seen escalation, we would have seen Aldis getting increasingly frustrated, we would have seen him making increasingly bold threats, we would have seen some kind of narrative progression. Instead, we've seen the same pattern repeat over and over with no development and no resolution, which suggests this isn't a carefully planned story but rather WWE's creative team having no idea how to book a credible authority figure. The most recent example of Aldis's incompetence happened on last week's SmackDown when the Bloodline interrupted the main event match, caused a disqualification, and then proceeded to assault everyone involved including the referee, and Nick Aldis's response was to come out at the end of the show and announce that next week there would be a tag team match involving some of the Bloodline members as punishment. A tag team match. That's the consequence for interrupting a main event, causing a disqualification, and assaulting multiple people including an official. Not a suspension, not a fine, not even a handicap match that would actually disadvantage the Bloodline, just a regular tag team match that the Bloodline could potentially win, which would mean they faced no real negative consequences whatsoever for their actions. Fans immediately mocked this announcement as typical Aldis weakness, and even the commentators seemed to be struggling to present it as a significant punishment when clearly it was nothing of the sort. WWE's decision to keep Nick Aldis in the general manager role despite his obvious struggles suggests one of two things. Either WWE's creative team genuinely believes that having a weak ineffective authority figure makes for good television because it allows heels like the Bloodline to generate heat by exposing that weakness, or WWE has completely lost interest in the authority figure concept and Aldis is just going through the motions in a role that the company no longer cares about developing properly. Neither explanation is particularly encouraging for SmackDown's future because both suggest fundamental misunderstandings about how wrestling storytelling works and what audiences want to see from their programming. The contrast between Nick Aldis's handling of the Bloodline and how he handles lower card wrestlers who cause minor infractions is also extremely telling and extremely problematic. When a mid-card wrestler gets into a minor verbal altercation backstage, Aldis will immediately fine them or threaten suspension. When someone shows up late to an event, Aldis will publicly chastise them and warn about future consequences. But when the Bloodline commits assault, destruction of property, and multiple violations of professional standards, Aldis is suddenly nowhere to be found or issues meaningless statements that lead to zero actual punishment. This double standard is not only unfair to the wrestlers who are being held to stricter standards, it completely undermines Aldis's credibility and makes it obvious that he's either playing favorites or is too intimidated by the Bloodline's power to treat them the same way he treats everyone else. There are reports from backstage sources that some SmackDown wrestlers have gone directly to Triple H to complain about Nick Aldis's management of the brand and specifically about his failure to protect them from the Bloodline's aggression. These wrestlers allegedly told Triple H that they shouldn't have to live in fear of being attacked without provocation and without recourse, that the general manager should be creating an environment where everyone can do their jobs safely and professionally, and that Aldis has failed to create that environment through his passivity and his unwillingness to confront the Bloodline about their behavior. Triple H reportedly listened to these complaints and said he would address the situation, but as of yet there's been no visible change in how SmackDown operates or how Aldis handles the Bloodline, which suggests either Triple H doesn't view this as a serious problem or he's being overruled by other decision-makers within WWE's corporate structure. The worst-case scenario here is that Nick Aldis is actually following orders from WWE's creative team to allow the Bloodline's misbehavior to continue unchecked because someone in power believes this serves the storylines they want to tell. If that's true, then Aldis isn't really to blame for the chaos on SmackDown, the people above him are, but Aldis is still the public face of this failure and he's the one getting blamed by fans and wrestlers even if he's just following instructions. This would make Aldis's position even more unenviable because he's being set up to fail, being put in a role where he can't possibly succeed because the people making the decisions have tied his hands and prevented him from using the authority his position theoretically grants him. Regardless of whether Aldis is acting on his own judgment or following orders from above, the result is the same. SmackDown feels out of control, the Bloodline faces no meaningful consequences for increasingly egregious behavior, wrestlers don't feel protected by their general manager, and fans have lost respect for Aldis as an authority figure. That's a failure no matter how you analyze it, and WWE needs to either empower Nick Aldis to actually do his job properly by giving him the authority and backing to punish the Bloodline when they cross lines, or they need to replace Aldis with someone who can command respect and maintain order without being undermined by the wrestlers they're supposed to be managing. The Bloodline's recent misbehavior has included attacks on legendary wrestlers who appeared on SmackDown for special appearances, which is particularly problematic because these legends aren't full-time performers who can be built into ongoing storylines. They're special attractions who WWE brings in specifically to generate nostalgia and goodwill. When the Bloodline attacks these legends without facing consequences, it sends a message that nobody is safe from their aggression regardless of their status or their history with the company, and it makes WWE look foolish for not protecting the people they invite to appear on their programming. Nick Aldis should have immediately suspended the Bloodline after they attacked a Hall of Famer, should have fined them heavily, should have done something significant to demonstrate that certain lines cannot be crossed. His failure to do so made WWE look amateurish and made Aldis look like he has absolutely no control over his brand. At this point, the question isn't whether Nick Aldis has failed in his role as SmackDown general manager, the question is how much longer WWE will continue employing him in that role before they're forced to make a change. The locker room has lost faith in him, the audience has lost respect for him, and the Bloodline has demonstrated repeatedly that they don't fear him or his authority. Those are terminal problems for someone in a management position, problems that can't be fixed with better writing or a stronger push, problems that require either a complete reinvention of the character or a complete replacement of the person filling the role. WWE needs to make a decision quickly, because every week that passes with Aldis continuing to fail at basic management responsibilities is another week where SmackDown's credibility erodes and the Bloodline's unchecked behavior becomes more normalized and more difficult to eventually address. So tell me in the comments right now whether you think Nick Aldis deserves to keep his job as SmackDown General Manager or whether WWE needs to replace him immediately with someone who can actually control the Bloodline. Tell me if you believe Aldis is following orders from above or if he's genuinely just incompetent at his role. Tell me what consequences you think the Bloodline should face for their recent actions and whether you trust Aldis to deliver those consequences. Hit that subscribe button because this situation is developing weekly and you need to stay informed about every failure and every excuse as they happen. Share this video with everyone who watches SmackDown because Nick Aldis being blamed for the Bloodline's misbehavior recently on WWE is absolutely justified, and everyone needs to understand why this general manager has lost complete control of his brand and what that means for SmackDown's future moving forward. The evidence is overwhelming, the criticism is deserved, and the time for accountability is long overdue.